Only so far I can go.
Throughout much of the production, a motif began to arise.
Now, you started out thinking about, as you said, nuclear war. But
yes,
were
and
you
we just saw all
power?
things nuclear as part of the Holocaust, potentially. You know, I have to admit, I bought in to the anti-nuclear movement on the issue of safety, which in retrospect, the nuclear industry is one of the safest industries that's ever been created. If you look at the actual stats of people, and when you recognize that Chernobyl was actually an exception, in a way, the one that proves the rule that nuclear is generally safe, and you look at 3 Mile Island, it was actually a success story from the point of view of being a serious internal accident in the reactor, like a partial meltdown of the core. Not much worse can happen. It was a big economic mistake, but it didn't hurt anybody. The containment vessel worked, and that's what the engineers designed it to do. So I would much rather have a bunch of engineers with crew cuts who do not smoke dope on the job, right? Looking after my nuclear power plants than I would have a bunch of guitar-playing hippies.
Well, you know, the thing that a friend of mine who was very pro-nuclear power said that after 3 Mile Island, some people were killed by 3 Mile Island because that reactor being taken offline meant we used more coal power and people mining coal.
But when 3 Mile Island occurred, the 3 Mile Island accident.
What was unfolding in 3 Mile Island?
3 Mile Island reminded people that...
But that just because of 3 Mile Island.
After the debate with Patrick Moore and Harvey Wasserman, who did Democracy Now! Get to comment on the 30th anniversary of the accident at 3 Mile Island?
Democracy Now! On this eve of the 30th anniversary of 3 Mile Island, what do you think it's most important for people to understand? There's some people listening right now who weren't even born in 1979.
What's important to understand is that people were killed in this accident. The nuclear industry continues to spread the lie that no one was harmed. What they're now doing is they've gone into states like Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, demanding that ratepayers pay for new reactors before they're even built. And you know, so this is an ongoing struggle, and at the heart of it is what happened at 3 Mile Island and the continued denial of this industry of what really happened.
Is it difficult in the debate over nuclear energy to sometimes separate the logic of the argument from the emotions that are involved?
If I went in, I spent the worst week of my life in and around the environments of 3 Mile Island. I interviewed many people, and it was like being in Hiroshima after the bombing.
I don't think it's necessary to separate the logic from the emotion, actually, because basically our emotions have proven to be correct. The instinctual fear of nuclear power is warranted.
And people had tumors, cancers, leukemias, birth defects, stillbirths, malformations, reproductive problems, emphysema, stroke, skin rashes, hair loss. It was as if an atomic bomb had been dropped there.
And so our emotional opposition is accurate in terms of science. I don't think anything we've reacted to emotionally with nuclear power has been disproven.
Lie number 4. Many were killed at 3 Mile Island, and the government is covering this up.
What the nuclear establishment has been trying to do is to suppress information about nuclear power.
Now, this is the most venal lie that's been told in American industrial history.
And here's this baloney that no one died as a result of 3 Mile Island.
They denied that there was any melting of fuel. It turned out more than half the fuel melted, although they didn't confirm that for many years because they couldn't get into the core. They denied there were radiation releases. In fact, they had no idea how much radiation was released.
We did the accident that Grossman likes to imagine. We have the results. And the results are that that massive pool of molten fuel went down and touched a very thick metal barrier and froze. It solidified again. It hit the bottom of the pressure vessel, and it penetrated the bottom of the pressure vessel less than a fraction of an inch, about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so this fantasy that somehow a meltdown is going to penetrate a pressure vessel, penetrate the foundations of the plant, penetrate into the containment, go down and hit the water table and explode into a massive burst of energy that releases all the radiation all at once, is again a fantasy. It's not going to happen.
And some recent studies have documented this rise in cancer. Dr. Stephen Wing, Dr. Ernest Sternglass.
Truth. This lie is based on manipulated data and statistical trickery, yielding spurious conclusions repeatedly rejected by scientific peers.
It's important to remember that the impetus for the anti-nuclear movement started from inside the industry. And the two books that really got us going were Poison Power by Dr. John Goffman, who recently passed away, and Secret Fallout by Ernest Sternglass.
Ernest Sternglass, an electrical engineer, has for years practiced transparent distortions in trying to prove that nuclear plants caused widespread disease. Throughout the world, his analyses have been rejected as invalid, irresponsible, and without merit. Scientific journals have refused to publish his work because of its obviously fallacious character. Sternglass, after 15 years of being proved wrong, used his same discredited methods on 3 Mile Island data. A popular book, Killing Our Own, devotes a chapter to his falsehoods, and its authors share moral responsibility for disseminating them. They could have mentioned, for instance, that he had long been viewed as something of an eccentric and a fringe element in the radiation protection community. Even when they wrote their book in the early 1980s, they could have discussed that similar claims by Sternglass had been sharply criticized and rejected a decade previously by the Health Physics Society and many leading experts in the radiation protection community.
The Atomic Energy Commission then dispatched John Goffman, their chief medical guy, to refute Ernest Sternglass. And if he had not been politically involved with fighting nuclear power, he would have gotten a Nobel Prize because he discovered LDL cholesterol. When Sternglass came out, they said, John, go put him down. And Goffman went and he did a study and came back and concluded that 32,000 people a year would die from low-level radiation from atomic nuclear power plants. And then, so they told him in no uncertain terms to change his findings. And he says, you know, science doesn't really work that way. And they said, yes, but the Atomic Energy Commission, like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission now, does work that way.
While we are interested to hear your criticisms, we must evaluate them on the basis of journalistic standards. Our initial assertions about radioactivity were well documented, with written corroboration from legitimate print sources.
You know, science doesn't really work that way.
You are mistaken if you think that your book is a scientific publication. It is not. Results of scientific investigations are reported in peer-reviewed professional journals by professionals who are trained in the area under investigation.
I'm saying that if they haven't published a peer-reviewed paper, that they're just a scientist making a claim which has not gone through the scientific process to determine whether or not it's credible. Meanwhile, they're standing in opposition to actual peer-reviewed papers on this. I'm not saying that they're wrong. If they're correct, this is something that needs to be demonstrated, and it needs to be done by the process. We don't get to just say, this guy's a PhD, he's an engineer, he says this is impossible, therefore now it's plausible, when all the rest of them are publishing peer-reviewed papers saying, no, 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 here's the mistake, this is wrong.
They didn't do their homework. They haven't really been credible as far as I'm concerned. They haven't really done the job that they should do.
Nobody's investigated. The federal government, went away. By all rights, there should have been millions of dollars poured into an epidemiological study, which should have been easy enough to do. No one does it. No one's done it.
We actually had gone upstate, and a gentleman by the name of Harvey Wasserman, a nuclear opponent, was up there, and we had the opportunity to interview him.
There are about 13 studies that were done. That were published in things like the Journal of Epidemiology. Columbia University did a study. The National Academies did studies. The Pennsylvania Health Department did studies. They've done follow-up studies.
No one does it. No one's done it.
But people still sued.
300 families sued in a class action lawsuit for damages, which I guarantee you were real.
Although the plaintiffs claimed over 100 rems of exposure, a level experienced by some of the survivors of the atomic bomb explosion at Hiroshima, the court noted that to win, they would only have to present evidence of exposure to 10 rems of radiation.
Lawsuits, they went to the courts made a decision based on a lot of evidence. The judge, who actually has an interesting name, Judge Rambo, she threw out the case, said there was no support. She tried to give it every benefit of the doubt she could.
The federal judge, a woman named Sylvia Rambo, said they gave the classic industry line, which is not enough radiation escape to do any harm, therefore you have no case. even though there are 2,400 of you, you've got all these medical records.
The area in Pennsylvania where 3 Mile Island happened has been an industrial area for a long time. It was a coal-producing area. They had steel mills. They had chemical plants. There's a coal plant just down the river from 3 Mile Island, which happened to run a lot more than it would have if 3 Mile Island would have kept running. So if there's increased cancer rates, there's all kinds of studies. There's one guy, one epidemiologist from North Carolina, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, who everybody points to.
Dr. Stephen Wing.
Is that Dr. Wing?
Wing, yeah, Dr. Wing.
Some recent studies have documented this rise in cancer.
Read the Wing study, okay? He assumed that there had to be more releases than there were. It's not very well done. He assumed away a lot of things and said, well, if this much was released, then maybe we can find something. So read that study. It's not particularly convincing, and there's an awful lot of other studies out there.
And what really galls me is when newspapers and magazines sort of, just matter of fact, I think pretty much, say that nobody was killed at 3 Mile Island. That really pisses me off because they haven't done the research, they haven't looked into what really happened there.
I'm kind of a Democratic kind of guy, and the majority of the people who are knowledgeable about this area say nobody was killed. There was very little that was released. Most of it was noble gases, inert gases that have very low ability to affect anybody. They don't stick in your lungs. Was it more than you get from an airplane trip across the country or a normal background dose of radiation? I don't think so, and neither does anybody else who's studied the matter.
There is evidence that the foundation that was laid 30 years ago and continuing to the President Against Nuclear Power is still there and is ready to be activated and has been activated, and we're not going to need to learn these lessons again. We learned the lessons and we